702.
The Big Interview
With Bongani Bingwa.
7:15 onto this now. Former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel has joined a powerful call to turn debt into hope. He and 30 leading economists and influential figures, including Nobel Economics Laureate Joseph Stiglitz, central bankers and finance ministers around the world, want the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to change their approach when it comes to debt from poor countries. African countries, for example, spend an average 17% of their revenue just to service external debts, leaving little room for health, education, or investments for the future, something that is clearly unstable. He joins us now. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Good morning to you and the listeners, Bongani.
Debt relief for many African countries would be a game changer, would it not?
It would be a massive game changer. The problem, as you highlighted in your introduction, is that too many countries face the challenge. They default. I mean, there are some countries who defaulted. Zambia, Mozambique, Ghana, Ethiopia have defaulted, and that's a massive problem because it takes at least 3 years to get back into discussion. But there are many countries who avoid the actual default against the banks, but then default against their people. So the issues you mentioned, the underfunding of health, education, and general social protection across the continent are the manifestations of that. It has to be a development default rather than a default on the banks. And this is growing in leaps and bounds, and it's deeply, deeply worrying for us.
I mean, doesn't the argument, or at least, the argument that these terms are often stringent to prevent those indebted countries from defaulting, how do we work around that?
Well, I mean, you know, if the rules were equal for all, there would be a basis for that discussion. Just recently, the U.S. bailed out Argentina to the tune of $20 billion. They bought Argentinian pesos and gave them dollars. And they used a resource within the IMF called the special drawing rights. The U.S. doesn't need it because the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank and the U.S. dollar are the reserve. The U.S. dollar is the reserve currency, so they could donate that money to the friend President Milei in Argentina, and Argentina's offered a bailout, but the same does not apply to poor countries everywhere. And this situation is deeply worrying. You know, it's a matter that's been raised in different places where I've been active this year, including a UN task force on development solutions convened by the Secretary General, focused largely on debt. The Jubilee Commission, which was convened by the late Pope Francis. And thirdly, we are still working on an African expert panel as part of the G20. The work will continue beyond the G20 Leaders Summit in November to ensure that we can get a handle on this.
One might argue that perhaps the US could do that for Argentina, but is that kind of solution possible for many countries? And I'm thinking of this recent UN report that suggested that a cap perhaps would be the way to go, that maybe 10% in as many as 21 countries would unlock enormous sums to provide things like clean water and sanitation. And perhaps a bigger question here has to be, if the IMF is being accused now of being a debt collector for the rich, do you see the global north agreeing to some of what you are asking for?
Look, there has been movement. I was around in 1995 when there was a push for relief for highly indebted poor countries called the HIPIC initiative. It helped. But it wasn't substantial, and so countries fell back into debt thereafter. These issues remain, and I think one of the issues that distinguishes the present from 1995 was that there's been a shift away from official lending to private sector lending. In 1995, the bulk of debt was to the IMF and the World Bank. And now there are a number of other agencies, including countries like China, that don't offer debt relief. But the amounts borrowed have grown in leaps and bounds, and the interest rate variables have also kicked in. So there's a complex of issues. I don't think the breakfast show has enough time to talk about it, but it runs through things like the role of ratings agencies, sources of capital, sometimes the absence of strict treasury edicts in borrowing countries. I would include South Africa in that. And then, of course, the fact that savings pools are minimal in poor countries. South Africa, Mauritius, and Namibia would be three of the countries on the African continent who have sufficient resources from its pension funds so that the bulk of our borrowing is domestic. Almost everywhere else on the continent, countries have to borrow from foreign resources. And so exchange rate variables, commodity price pressures, all of that places countries in dire straits in a very short space of time.
The current geopolitical environment and all its attendant uncertainties in many senses might be a reason, some argue, for a reset of that post-World War II order that established the IMF and the World Bank. Does this moment present that kind of opportunity?
To rational people, it clearly does. And I would even include Bongani Bingwa in the rational people. But the problem that we have with the United Nations is that the veto countries in the Security Council won't give that up and won't even discuss how to take that forward. And this presents us with a major problem. I think the United Nations is weakened as a consequence. It's weakened in the current geopolitical period when we see what's happening with wars, for instance. But it's also a big issue when one deals with its cousins in Washington, the Bretton Woods institutions. It hasn't been all bad. But I think that there's a heck of a lot of work to do, primarily because the shareholding of the IMF is vested with the same wealthy countries, and they hang on to this. It was wrong in the beginning in 1944 at Bretton Woods, and it's become continuously wrong over the period. So the shareholding, in fact, the U.S. has an effective veto on lending by the IMF, and you aren't able to kind of move the dial immediately. It's going to take a monumental effort to change that.
You mentioned, this will be my final question to you, you mentioned things we could do right as some of these indebted countries, and I'm looking at the front page of the Business Day this morning, cash held by firms now surging to 2 trillion rand as companies hold back on investment. Can the private sector play a role here, and does that low confidence concern you?
Yes, of course it does. The problem with the lead story in the Business Day today is that money is private money sitting there underutilized. It may have been better put to work in industrial development, in the advancement of some new economic expansion. But money tends to be lazy, and so you avail all of that money to government debt. The owners of the capital are very happy because they know that they will get regular interest payments, and eventually the capital sum will be returned. So that's not a solution. We need to look at this issue rather differently, because we need economic expansion, but we also need opportunities for government to be able to borrow at reasonable rates and be able to repay, bearing in mind that the purpose of government is to provide public services. And if government spends all its money on debt servicing, it can't provide those public services. I think that's a circle that we need to square.
Are you worried about another crash?
Look, there are all the makings of the crash, and we don't always read it correctly. One of the most volatile currencies in the present is the US dollar. It's not that anybody in South Africa has done magnificently. It's that the decisions of the U.S. administration, frequently capricious, has an impact on the stability of the dollar. You can see this also coming through in the fact that the gold price is now more than $4,000 an ounce, because people are looking for security away from the US dollar. We've got to read all of these things. The tea leaves aren't reading very well, but we've got to be informed and take our decisions early.
You spoke of rational minds. There are others who will say Trevor Manuel was the best finance minister we've ever had. Appreciate your time and your perspective this morning.
Thank you very much, Bongani.
Trevor Manuel, former finance minister of South Africa.
Current events, developing stories,
Tough questions.
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.